Come here, I'll show you how to draw a cute demon girl portrait. Well, hello there, I'm Detroit. I have opened Photoshop, as usual, to draw a portrait. This will be different from the last portrait I did, which was more realistic. Today it will look a bit more comic-like. That's how I like to view and do art. You take something from a practice session and apply it to something different. I learned, or rather I'm still learning, to draw realistically, but that doesn't mean that all my efforts need to concentrate towards always drawing realistic portraits. I take pride in the fact that all my drawings are very different from each other. Nevertheless, I learned a lot by studying realistic art styles. Now it's time to apply it to another style. The style I'm looking for today is what I would call an unrealistically pretty portrait. By that I mean drawing a female face whose proportions are not right, and that looks prettier than what is possible. All the traits that would be usually considered attractive are emphasized. The eyes are too big, the chin is too thin, the hair is perfectly messy and natural, the limbs are plump, etc, etc. And what better model for that art style than using a picture by Sam Does Art? Here's the picture I'm referencing. As you will see, my own drawing will look a bit different since I'm not accustomed to these sort of proportions, but it's mostly similar. So yeah, the character I'm basing this on doesn't come from my imagination. The style, the pose, the face, it's all based on this drawing done by someone else. However, I'll tweak it enough to make it my own. You'll see what I mean. As always, the process of drawing this portrait starts with the sketch. A finished art piece is only as good as its initial sketch. I really believe that a sketch is everything. It's in the sketching phase that you'll figure out the right proportions, the composition, etc. The more time you spend on a sketch to make it look good, the easier the rest of the process will be. The brush I'm using is a slightly textured oval brush. The pressure of my stylus will define the size and the opacity of the brush stroke. I'm using a blue color rather than black because I like it better for my sketches. In turn, when I lower the opacity of the sketching layer to ink, it helps when it's colored and not just values, although that might be just a personal preference. I don't always sketch in blue. I also use a lot of brown or dark purple. If I add a layer of cloth, for example, I'd probably change the color of that layer. Usually the color of the sketch will help me to define a mood, even though it's a bit hard to explain. I tend to sketch in blue something that will be a bit colder, and sketch in dark red a character that will have a warmer mood. It all comes down to your personal preference. I've only recently discovered that I tended to often do that. Once I'm satisfied with the sketch, which due to the magic of video editing will conveniently be right now, I'm moving on to the inking. For the ink layer, I'm using the same brush but much smaller and without any variation in opacity. I really like this brush because it has a bit of texture, so it's nicer and more organic than a simple hard-run brush. To ink the parts that are a bit harder to do, I don't hesitate to use digital tools. The eyes, for example, can be perfectly symmetrical with this girl's pose and angle, so I will draw one and duplicate it to make the other. A while back, I thought that it was cheating to do it that way, but now I honestly don't see the problem with using the tools available, and you shouldn't hesitate as well. We all have a preferred side to draw curves as well, and depending on which line I'm inking, I will flip the canvas horizontally to make it easier. Something I do a lot while inking is switch layers. For example, I will ink the face and then ink the hair on another layer. This way I can be more free with my lines. Let's take the hair strand that goes over the eye, for example. With 2 layers, I can draw the hair strand line, and if layer I want to move it, I don't have to carefully erase it while keeping the eye intact. Once all the inks on different layers are done, only then do I erase the other lines. If I really want to be sure that I won't make a mistake, I will use a mask instead of an eraser. What it does is define which part of the layer is visible and which part won't appear. The eye is still there, I just don't show the part behind the hair. If later on I have a change of heart and I want to show the eye, I don't have to redraw it, I can just change the mask. It proved to be really useful when I drew the slices that's cutting the character apart. I wasn't convinced with the slice on her forehead when I drew it at first, for example, and when I moved it later, I was glad to have kept the horn intact on its own layer and just used the mask. But I'm talking, and the process keeps going. I've skipped over explaining the flats. This is relatively easy. On different layers, I'm drawing all the areas that will be of the same color. One layer for the skin, one for the hair, one for the horns, and so on. Again, for the same principles as before, using different layers makes it much easier to navigate and change things around. For the shading, I will use clipping masks, so I only have to define the areas of the flats once, and then I can shade away without a care for borders. My shading process tends to always go darker and darker. I'm starting with a color that is close to the flat, then with every pass I'll pick a darker color. With my soft round brush, first I'll shade the contours of the face, the top of the forehead and the eyelids and side of the nose. With the second pass, I'll emphasize the orbits a bit more, the depression between the lips and the nostrils. I will then go more precise with every subsequent pass. Something that always looks good for light-skinned characters is to add a reddish glow next to the shading and on the tip of the nose. I have to say that I don't have much experience drawing other skin tones. It's something I will get into in the future, so most of my characters are white skin for now. For the hair, the process is the same. I'm going darker and darker. Sometimes I will mix it up a little and use different layer styles. Feel free to experiment with different layer styles and their opacity to make nicer effects. That's what I'm doing to add a gradient to the hair, for example. I'm making one side colder and another warmer with a bit of orange and blue. Very sparingly, because I don't really know how to use it well, I'm also adding hair strands with a brush made for hair. Very sparingly, I insist. Drawing hair is something I struggle on, and for this drawing I didn't want to think too hard, so I used this shortcut, but most of the time I wouldn't pick such a brush. It's harder to make it look nice if you use a brush that you don't really know how to use. Most experienced digital artists will tell you that using simple brushes often work best. Anyway, a good rule is that the more blatant your use of shortcut is, most of the time, the more clunky your art will look. The last thing I want to say about this piece concerns the line art. Oh, and before that, the slices. So, the character is cut at different points. Basically, I didn't want to bother shading the cuts themselves, so I didn't. I just made the inside of the skin cuts a bit darker and redder, but I didn't even bother for the hair, for example. So, that's it. I just didn't feel like doing it. Now, the line art. Something I like doing more and more is coloring the line art. I made the skin lines red and warm, while the hair lines are blue and cold. Because the eyes are the focus point of this drawing, I left their inking black, which is more powerful in a way. It has more impact. Lastly, I added gradients everywhere. The line art gets lighter near the bottom left, the background gets darker near the bottom right, etc. I don't really have a reason for it, I just liked how it looked. That's the point of drawing, or at least it is for me. I don't necessarily need a reason, I do things I like because I like them. That concept, in and of itself, is behind this entire drawing. I didn't feel like creating a character from the beginning, so I used someone else's model. I did reference the original, of course, because it's the right thing to do, though. The rest of the process, like all the choices I made, were simply because in the moment I thought it looked nice enough. It's neither the most original or the most finished art piece I ever made, but it's still like nothing else, just because of that. I hope you liked the drawing process. If you did, there's a button for that right below. You can also leave a comment and tell me what you want to see me draw next. I will take any original prompt and any art style as well. Subscribe to see me draw just that in the future, and check out my social media in the description for all my past and future art. I'm Detroit, and I'll see you soon, my friends. Bye!